So let's begin with question 61. What is the maximum allowable traffic load for aircraft given the following data? DOM, total fuel, landing mass, performance, one structurally limited, another performance limited, trip fuel, startup and taxi fuel, zero fuel mass. So we have to find traffic load. Let's start with a step 1 in which we draw three columns, one for takeoff mass, another for landing mass, and the third one for zero fuel mass. Now in this question we have not been given any takeoff mass value, but we have been given maximum structural landing mass and performance limited landing mass. Now between these two masses we will select that landing mass which has a lower value, and that landing mass is maximum structural landing mass with a weight of 50,000 kg, lower than 54,000 kg, which is of performance limited mass. So in the column of landing mass, I am going to write down 50,000 kg. Okay, let's write 50. So 50 stands for maximum structural landing mass, and I have selected 50 because it is lower than 54, which is performance limited landing mass. Next, to find takeoff mass, you will add trip fuel to landing mass. So trip fuel is 17,000 or 17. So I'm going to add 17 here. 50 plus 17 is 67. Now zero fuel mass formula is zero fuel weight plus fuel on board. So when you add fuel to zero fuel weight, you get takeoff mass. So zero fuel weight is 51,400 kg or 51.4. Fuel on board, also known as takeoff fuel, the fuel in the tanks at the start of takeoff run, that is not given to you directly, but they have given total fuel and startup and taxi fuel. So you can find out takeoff fuel by subtracting startup and taxi fuel from total fuel. Startup and taxi fuel from total fuel. So that will be equal to 20,000 minus 350, which is equal to 20,000 minus 350 is equal to 19,650. Okay, so I'm going to add 19,000, 19.65 here. So 51.4 plus 19.65 is 71.05. So one takeoff mass value is 67. Another that we have found out is 71.05. We have to select that takeoff mass value, which is the lower one. And over here 67 is lower than 71.05. So this becomes a regulated takeoff mass. Step number 2, use the formula regulated takeoff mass equals to traffic load or payload plus DOM plus fuel on board. Substitute the values. So regulated takeoff mass is 67. Traffic load will find out. DOM in the question is 30,000 or 30. Fuel on board or takeoff fuel is 19.65. Therefore, traffic load or payload will be equal to 67 minus 30 plus 19.65, which is equal to 67 minus 49.65. 67 minus 49.65 is 17.35. Okay, so the correct answer will be option Charlie. 17.35 is nothing but 17,350 kg when you multiply by 1000. What I normally do is for easy calculations, simple calculations, I divide this big values by 1000. Okay, and in the final answer I multiply that by 1000. Okay, so it's the same thing. So 17,350, and it's up to you if you don't want to divide the values, divide the values by 1000 and want to write the full value, for example 50,000 plus 17,000, you can do that. But I divide by 1000 to make my calculations faster. Question 62. What is the maximum allowable traffic load for aircraft under following conditions? And the conditions are similar to the previous question. Okay. So let's start with a step 1, which is to draw takeoff mass column, a landing mass column, and one zero fuel mass column. Now we do not have takeoff mass value in this question. Okay, so we will put that column empty. Okay, leave it empty. In the landing mass column, what is the procedure? You are going to select a value which is lower of performance limited landing mass and maximum structural landing mass, a value lower, okay, lower between them, plus trip fuel. So now between performance limited landing mass and maximum structural landing mass, the lower value belongs to performance limited landing mass, which is 58,000, whereas maximum structural landing mass is 65,000. So we'll go with performance limited landing mass, which is 58,000 or 58. Trip fuel. What is trip fuel? It is 17,000. So plus 17. So 58 plus 17 is 75. 75 or 75,000. Now in the zero fuel mass column, the formula you know, zero fuel mass plus takeoff fuel or fuel on board. So that is equal to how much? Zero fuel mass is not given in the question. So no point in proceeding with this. So now we have only one takeoff mass value, which is 75. And by accident, it will become a regulated takeoff mass. So step number 2, regulated takeoff mass equals to dry operating mass plus fuel on board or takeoff fuel plus payload or traffic load. So regulated takeoff mass equals to, therefore 75 equals to 30 plus fuel on board or takeoff fuel, which will be equal to total fuel minus startup and taxi fuel. So total fuel is 20,000 or 20 minus startup and taxi is 0.35. 20 minus 0.35 is 190.65. So right here 190.65 plus payload. Therefore, payload or traffic load will be equal to 75 minus 30 plus 19.65. 75 minus 49.65 is 25.35. Okay, or 25.35 or 25,350 kilogram. So the correct option will be option delta. 62 is delta. Okay. Next. Question 63. What is the maximum allowable traffic load for aircraft given the following data? Again, similar conditions are given. Zero fuel mass, two types of landing masses, trip fuel, total fuel, so on and so forth. Step number 1, landing mass column and zero fuel mass column. In the landing mass column, you are going to write a value which is lower of performance limited landing mass and maximum structural limited landing mass. To that, you are going to add trip fuel. In the zero fuel mass column, you are going to follow the formula zero fuel mass plus takeoff fuel. Now between maximum structural landing mass and performance limited landing mass, you have to select a lower value. Okay, and the lower value belongs to performance limited landing mass. Performance limited landing mass is 24,000. So consider 24 plus trip fuel. Trip fuel is 1000, so 1. 24 plus 1 is 25. So this is our first possible takeoff value. Next column, zero fuel mass. Zero fuel mass is 51,400 or 51.4. Takeoff fuel is not given directly, but we can find out takeoff fuel by following the formula. Takeoff fuel equals to total fuel minus startup and taxi fuel. Total fuel is 1200. Startup taxi fuel is 35 kg only. So 1200 minus 35 should be 1165. Yes. Or 1.165 when you divide it by 1000. So 51.4 plus 1.165 is equal to 52.565. Okay. So now you have the second possible takeoff value. Between these two values, you have to select that value which is the lower one, and that value is 25. Okay, that value is 25. So this becomes our regulated takeoff mass. Regulated takeoff mass, next step 2 formula is dry operating mass plus fuel on board plus payload or traffic load. So regulated takeoff mass is 25, dry operating mass is 16, fuel on board is 1.165, payload you do not know, so leave it as it is. Therefore, payload will be equal to 25 minus 17.165. So 25 minus 17.165 is 7.835. Okay. So payload will be 7.835, meaning 7,835 kg. Okay. So select option number Charlie, 7,835 kg. 64. What is the maximum traffic load for aircraft? If its takeoff mass, landing mass, zero fuel masses are given, DOM given, trip given, takeoff fuel is also given. So direct question. Step 1, draw 3 columns, one for takeoff mass, the second one for landing mass, the third one for zero fuel mass. In the takeoff mass column, you are going to write the value which is the lower of performance limited takeoff mass and maximum structural takeoff mass. In the landing mass column, you are going to write a value which is the lower of performance limited landing mass and maximum structural landing mass. To that, you are going to add trip fuel. To that, you are going to add trip fuel. In the third column, that is zero fuel mass column, you are going to use the formula zero fuel mass plus fuel on board. Okay. So let's put the values in the respective columns. Takeoff mass column, you are going to write maximum takeoff mass value 177. So this is our first takeoff value. In the landing mass column, you will write landing mass value 109 plus trip fuel which is 34. So 109 plus 34, which is 143. Zero fuel mass column, zero fuel mass plus takeoff fuel which is 103 plus 37.7, and that will be equal to 140.7. Okay. Now, out of this three possible takeoff values, we have to select that takeoff value which is the lowest of all, and that is, as you can see, 140.7. So our regulated takeoff mass becomes 140.7. Step 2, utilize the formula regulated takeoff mass equals to dry operating mass plus payload plus fuel on board. So 140.7 operating mass, which is 67, plus payload plus fuel on board, which is equal to 37.7. Okay. Therefore, payload will be equal to 140.7 minus 67 plus 37.7. So 140.7 minus 67 plus 37.7, which is 104.7. So 140.7 minus 104.7 equals to 36. So correct answer is option A, 36,000 kg. So this is how you do the sum. We will do the next questions in the next video lecture. I hope you have understood and liked this video lecture. Do hit the like button for that. Subscribe to this channel if you haven't yet, and share this video with all your friends. Keep practicing. See you in the next lecture.